So let's just jump straight into it. My talk. Who am I? My name is Marc. If you've spoken to me online, you might know me as Kabu. And I am core team for the temporal zone, co-founder of AwesomWasm, and just like you do. I pride myself on being extraordinarily responsive. So if you guys want to get in touch, my handle is the same most everywhere. Please feel free to reach out. Or, I'll be here always. So, kind of a continuation of my, chiefly, I am a co-founder of AwesomWasm. And working on AwesomWasm is where I've gotten nearly all of my exposure to Authz. Right? So this is not necessarily to my own horn, but it's just to kind of say I had a certain experience with Authz, right? It was originally, or it is, a Cosmwasm SDK module, and I have basically no connection to the original Go implementation, right? My experience and what I'll talk about today comes from this past year and a half of having what I think is like the largest scale app that is highly integrated with Authz and leverages Authz. And you can see in the tweet that I'm quite proud of, even Zaki could tell back at our beginning that we were starting this push of pushing Authz to its limits, right? Commercializing it, seeing it go from something that was meant to, from what I understand, be used to make UX with cold wallets a little bit easier for personal use. Right? We are pushing it to the big stage, commercializing it, and getting everyone to it. So specifically, moving to this outpost model, where we have contracts that are based on Authz, leverage Authz to a high level on multiple chains, right? So this has pushed the my experience with Authz to a very high degree, and our use of Authz is growing all the time. And I just want to shout out, there's a couple other great teams that I'm aware of that are doing absolutely great work on Authz. Mike is around here somewhere. I've spoken with Interchain, they're doing some great stuff too. So yeah, just my perspective here. So I think it's prudent to kind of start with defining the terms, because as of yet, I can explain what Authz is. So before I can define Authz, and really to me, Authz isn't even the point. Non-custody is becoming, right? Authz, is a specific tool that we can use to reach further on that non-custodial scale, right? To limit the amount of custody that you're giving up. Right? So I believe that custody and non-custody exists on a spectrum, right? So on one end, you have completely custodial, which would be giving up your tokens to some guy, right? He says he can make you great returns, and you're assuming that when you want them back, he will be willing and actually able to give them back to you, right? I think we innately have a gut feeling that that is kind of bad on many levels. On the other side, there's full self-custody, right? So you're giving up literally no custody, and you're going to do everything yourself. Maybe you're going to do some sort of trading yourself, and you're not going to give anybody any access to any of your funds. Right? I think we have a similar intuition that this is probably more secure, but it's limiting from the experience that you get from it. You can only apply your own knowledge to it, right? So that's quite limiting. We have smart contract vault somewhere on the spectrum. Far to the right is Authz-based approach, right? And this is what I'm a huge proponent. So Authz-based approaches, to me, are a non-custodial approach where you give up fine-grained permissions to your tokens without actually giving up your tokens themselves, right? So this gives an experience much more similar to self-custody because you're not giving up your physical tokens, but it increases the UI exponentially. and the things that we're able to do with make we can construct some very elaborate things. So if we get to the core of what is the Authz module, it's a Cosmos SDK module, and the whole point of it is that you can grant a permission to another wallet from yours to allow it to broadcast a certain message on your behalf, right? So you could grant permission to another user to withdraw your delegation rewards on your behalf. So they can do this. Traditionally, you would send that probably to a contract, and that the contract would stake your tokens, right? And then it would be able to withdraw the funds from those, and you would ask for them back later. With Authz, we can skip this. You maintain control of your own tokens, and the other wallet can broadcast that message for you, right? And if you read kind of the ABR or some of the documentation around Authz, you'll see the terminology of grantors, grantees, and grants. So I'll try to keep that. I'll keep that consistent. And I think the other thing to add here is, so the way it typically works is if you want to add a new grant into the system, right? There's maybe something that you want a grant for, you don't want to take custody of the tokens. You will approach probably the Cosmos SDK, and you look around and you will see that it will really only accept the most general authorizations into the Cosmos SDK, and they kind of encourage you. You need something more specific, have a specific chain implemented, right? If you needed something specific for NFTs, it will tell you that Stargaze or whoever, you just implement it. And this is a problem that's high on my mind. So just to kind of drive this home, here's a very concrete example of what it would look like to use Authz. Here we have two addresses here. We have kaku.cosmos and we have Cosmos. So Kaku will broadcast this grant TX on chain and specifying the withdraw delegation rewards message type. Yieldmost then, or anyone really, can query state. They can see that this is a grant that exists, right? They know that they have this new permission, and then they can broadcast an execute message to do this on Kaku's behalf, right? So there's a few types of authorizations. What I showed here is a generic authorization, and there's a ton of different ones at this point, but generic is the most flexible. And just as kind of an intuition check, the kind of rhetorical question that I'll ask and then answer immediately is, when yieldmost.cosmos does that withdraw delegated rewards for Kaku, where do the rewards go? The answer would be into Kaku's wallet, right? Because yieldmost is executing this just as if it was Kaku doing it, right? And there's a whole bunch of intricacies here that I won't be able to get into, but there's kind of some neat stuff around whose sequence number gets bumped and who pays for gas fees. We don't have time for it today, but I love to nerd out on this stuff. But, quick, I don't want to linger on it, but I can talk about all day Authz being more safe, more secure, and it's less custodial. But you can get wrecked signing the wrong Authz grant. Be careful with what you're signing, right? You can give up, send permission to your tokens, transfer permission, contract execute. There's plenty of things where things get screwed up, so make sure you know what you're saying. So, Authz used today from Cosmwasm is a bit of a mixed bag, but it's definitely usable, and it's better than it's ever been. We kind of three things I hit on here is that message execute, which is how you actually broadcast something on somebody else's behalf. This is usable. There's some boilerplate there. I have it abstracted in a couple places, and so that's kind of not an issue. You wind up not being able to use like the built-in Stargate message, but that's fine. Contract execution authorization is an advancement that Confio had pushed through a couple months ago, And this gives us an authorization type specifically for granting permissions to call a contract on your behalf. So this has really exploded the number of options for what we can do with Authz, right? Because you can specify somebody else can call a contract for me with like certain fund limits or iteration limits, so on and so forth, different messages on the contract. So it really opens up a complicated web of Authz that can be used to accomplish tasks that were not accomplishable using non-custodial methods. With that. Lastly, querying grants from Cosmwasm is largely not a thing right now. We can get around it, but you kind of can check if somebody has granted your contract or any other address some permission. We have ways around this kind of. If the contract doesn't have the requisite permissions, we'll just fail unauthorized. And I think we have efforts on both chain sides and the Cosmwasm side to update this functionality and make it so you can do these queries, because that will open up, again, a whole new set of apps that can be built. So this takes me to Authz++, which is a repo that I've been working on for months now and trying to introduce to solve what I see as one of the most pivotal problems here. The goal of Authz++ is to make the default Authz permissions extendable and parameterized. So in Authz++, you can create a new contract which extends any grant in some specific way. Right? It's a bit abstract, but for example, you might create a Authz extension that extends the redelegation permission to only allow that redelegation to be executed if it's from an inactive validator, right? So we take this permission that was very broad, and because it was so broad, it's kind of not so useful. We narrow it down. We say, you can only redelegate my funds if the delegator or if the validator is jailed. And I think we can immediately think of use cases for this, more narrow, more fine-grained permission. And I mean, I currently have a number of contracts out there that are doing this, limiting the permission, limiting the permissiveness of message sends, of withdrawal rewards, in a number of different ways, adding periodicity to message send, regardless. So Authz++ is a public good, right? It seeks to deploy the whole suite of contracts that extend Authz to every chain that supports Cosmwasm. We want to bring in the entire ecosystem of Cosmwasm developers to help continue to make Authz great and even more useful. And I believe that Authz is as unique and important of a technology to our ecosystem as, or at least it can be, even up there with IDC, right? It's really something that we can nourish and be proud of as an ecosystem. I only have a few slides left, so I just want to kind of hammer home this point before we move on to kind of the last few, which are more technical. But for an Authz grant, by default, they tend to be very broad. They have very few parameters, right? The contract execution one I mentioned earlier is the exception. So if you think about something like a message send permission, it is so broad that you can't think of just giving basically anyone permission to send tokens out of your wallet. But as soon as we narrow that down and we say, okay, you can send tokens from my wallet, you being some stranger, but you can only send 10 atoms per week, right? Or you say you can only send it to certain addresses, or you can only send it to any of these things automatically bring ideas and projects to mind, because suddenly it goes from this thing that I don't want permission to send arbitrary tokens from anyone's wallet to any address. I don't want that permission for you guys. But I would be happy to take one that's extremely narrow. So a permission that is more specific and is precisely what you need is the most powerful permission to have. One that's sufficiently broad is just not useful. You might as well just take somebody's tokens and custody them, right? Then take this big, broad sentence. So as I've been building Authz-based, there's kind of two key insights that I've had. One being that these Authz extensions must be composable on a Cosmwasm level. I think this is something that even if you're not interested in Authz, this is kind of an underexplored area of Cosmwasm in general. Cosmwasm has this kind of amazing property of every contract being this atomic program that exists in the wild. So to be able to combine these in the wild and rely on each one will enable us to build smaller and more correct programs, right? And to be able to more easily bring people in to work on them. Really, if you look through some of the code base, the message, one of the permissions for limiting message send to specific addresses, it is an incredibly simple contract. Any of you could look at my contract and tell me, okay, yeah, this does exactly what was intended, right? So to be able to build all of these extensions that way and then combine them in the wild so that you have the base Authz permission, right? This is where we're getting the base permissioning from, and then 2 or 3 or 4 Authz extensions all combined so you're dealing with all of the parameters set forth in those contracts. This is a big shift in the way we kind of do Cosmwasm, and it's the only way that I see to make these extensions via Cosmwasm useful. The alternative would be kind of how they do it in the Go side, which is all the logic for all of the parameters that you need on that permission need to be all collated together. They need to all live together. They need to all know about the edge cases that could occur, and you can see why developing this further to the utmost degree in the CSDK side is untenable, right? But having this composability is a huge insight. The other bit that I think is a big insight is that for really any contract or really any project that is sufficiently using Authz to a high degree, you need a way to be able to query that contract and ask, what permissions do I need to set up in place before I can call you and utilize it, right? This is because sometimes those permissions are dynamic, right? Sometimes they change between versions. There's many reasons why we need a DSL specifically for specifying the required conditions. It's very difficult for me to convey, these months of coding, right, and like getting this to the point where I even realized that without having a grant spec, without being able to query which grants are necessary for a contract, I think it's hard to distill down quite how big a leap this has been. But this is one of the aspects of the Authz++ repo that's kind of still in flux. And once I have this ironed out, this and some of the composability will have a true 1.0 release. Right? Until then, we have some small contracts that are not composed together yet, and we're using them, and they seem to work great. So what's next is hopefully you guys have some understanding of the benefits and power of a non-custodial approach like this. And I think one of the nice things is that everyone involved has a way to push this forward. Right? I'm not going to read off the slide, but any participants in the system can push for whether that be CSDK development to continue Authz or for supporting the Authz+ repo and getting this new suite of extension on your chain, or even just pushing the dApps you already use to consider non-custodial options, right? There's a bit of a shift to be had away from these default strategies and whatnot, where you have to hope that people will be willing and able to give your token back. Lastly, so as I said at the very beginning, I am on the core team for Temporal, and that is our blockchain that we are in a private testnet for. It should be coming soon. And the whole point of Temporal is to be a hub for non-custodial interchain dApps, right? So there are a few of us on the team. We have an extraordinary amount of experience with non-custodial approaches. Authz, chief among them, but there's other ones. There's other approaches that are valid and we have experience with, and we would love builders to work with. So yeah, if you are interested in doing this kind of work, or even if you're not interested in our chain at all, but still you're interested in non-custodial crypto, please feel free to come say hi, and I'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks to the rest of my team and the other devs that I've put my work on top of.
Yeah, thank you for the great talk. I have a question regarding the governance of those of the contracts.
Yeah.
So as I understand, in order to make those work, you have to, as a user, give a full Aussie grant to this contract. And so how do you see updating, migrating, and governance of those contracts? Because it's really dangerous to give Aussie, as you said, grant to something, an entity.
Sure. So the expectation is that the repo will be fully open source and open to the community to contribute to, audit, whatever. And then I expect that we will have versions on all the chains with them all verified. And so I mean, largely the fact that the code is open and transparent, and that the code is so modular and so maybe modular is the wrong word, but each contract is so incredibly simple for each one. It's easy for the community in general to view each one and know that it's doing the right thing. Right where we would get into a lot of trouble, I believe, is if we had these large extension contracts and we're trying to do many things at once. So I'm certain that my kind of contract that's combining the grants, I'm almost certain that I'm going to get that audited by a firm. Right? But then each individual one, as a result of having this strong combination one, they should be so simple that if you gave it to someone who's maybe not even a Rust dev, they'd be able to look at the logic and be like, okay, it's 200 lines of code, 150 is boilerplate, right? So there's 50 lines of code to look at. That's what it's.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. This is great. I'm completely honest, Aussie is too complex for me. So I'm really happy to see this being pushed forward and really show the use cases of that. My question is from the perspective of Cosmwasm core development. What are the one or two things that we as Confio and Cosmwasm maintainers can do to be an enabler to make your life easier?
Yeah, so the big things would be getting us the access to those, to be able to query the active grants, right? The fact that that's oftentimes gated behind Stargate queries is one of the bigger things. Other than that, I really don't think there's too much, right? If we could get message execute innately supported as a normal Stargate, instead of having to do it fully custom, that would be great, but that's a pretty easy third-party solution. So really the queries are the biggest thing to me.
Thanks for the talk. So I'm wondering more about
your thoughts on access control. So how do you keep control of the different types of messages? And have you considered a whitelist or governance parameters, like singleton, something along those lines?
Like, what do you mean by that?
Meaning like, so let's make a concrete example. So I own a valuable NFT, and I give permissions for the collection so that it can be staked, for instance. But I never ever want it to be transferred from my wallet. I never want it to be like listed on the marketplace, something like that. So you might want to only transfer like some to specific addresses, which you stated before. But let's say if somehow the Authz, like I don't see the Authz message, like I didn't read it what you said, and I accidentally like sent something in, right? Like some transfer thing. So maybe having additional guardrails on the governance level or whitelist level, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, right? We can work on the side of coding the actual grants to make sure that the grant you're looking for is possible, right? The specific one just for staking your NFT, you can do that. I think largely, so I'm actually due, I did a PR originally to Kepler to make the Authz grants more readable when signing them. And with version 2 of Kepler, the visualization of those grants is back to how it was before my PR. So actually, I'm due to go back in and to redo that PR. I agree. There's probably a strong case to be made for throwing up, especially on some of these bigger, scarier grants. Transfer, send, contract execute. Throw up a bigger warning for people so that they can see. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Oh, I'm blinded. Sorry. You were right under the light.
Sorry if I missed it in your presentation, but is there any reason you went with the Cosmwasm approach instead of contributing to the Authz module this changes?
Totally. Yeah. A large reason. So, from my personal experience, we actually got early on in our project, we got a very established team to start working on a new grant type that we knew was going to be pivotal to Authz. Right? So we knew this super early on. They started working on it. It probably took them 2 months to get the PR up, and maybe took another 2 months to get that PR added in, and then it maybe took another 2 months for it to get scheduled for release. And so, all in all, from the start to the first chain that I'm aware of that has 047, Cosmos 0.47. The first chain I know of is Empowered Chain, right? So they're the first chain I know of that has that grant that we had been trying to get implemented all the way back 8 months ago. So the ability for us to narrow these down and give Cosmwasm is pivotal because you or I could be like, oh, we need to narrow down voting information to make it usable. We could have that deployed by the end of the day if we were so inclined. If we extended the Cosmwasm. Yeah. Thanks.